The chicken or the egg? Hi, I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. Something from something. I've repeated this phrase so many times, but I keep repeating it because people just don't get it. The government has no money. It must take money from its populace. There are multiple biblical commands to give, but there are no commands to take. Thus, giving away other people's money is not a sustainable policy. As Margaret Thatcher famously said, eventually you run out of other people's money. Andy Kessler's article in the Wall Street Journal this week is titled, "Congress Can't Enact a Chicken." He writes, "Egg first. As legislators play a game of chicken with infrastructure bills, there's a huge misconception about how the economy actually works." Last week, Moody's economist Mark Zandi said more government spending on infrastructure and social programs like Medicaid will lift productivity. Mr. Kessler goes on to state what should be very obvious to any first-year economics student. An economy has to produce, then it can consume. See, trickle down doesn't exist. This is one of the great straw men often employed by the left. I've heard Hillary Clinton say it a few times. She says, they believe in trickle-down theory. Someone needs to ask her for her citation. Thomas Sowell says the trickle-down theory does not have an author. Imagine that. A theory without an author. The erudite Mr. Sowell goes on to explain that it's simply something they made up to give a name to President Ronald Reagan's economic policy. It seems they didn't like it because everyone got richer at the same time, or to quote President John F. Kennedy, "A rising tide lifts all boats." Why the left is against lifting all boats is a question I can't answer. Hugh Welchel said, "God made something out of nothing. Our job is to produce something out of something." Apparently, the Biden administration's economists believe that humans can make something out of nothing, or they can enact a chicken, as Mr. Kessler said. And my experience shows they're wrong. Mr. Kessler again. Here's how capitalism works. If you took the social justice version of Econ 101, here's the lesson you should have learned. Save, invest, produce, profit, consume. Save means postponing consumption, money, and time. Mr. Kessler goes on to say, only then can you invest, especially your human capital, in something productive. Usually this means doing more with less, being efficient and effective. This is when innovation happens. Another phrase I repeat quite often, the only thing that reliably separates rich from poor countries is policies that promote production. The examples are everywhere. Mr. Kessler continues, wealth comes only from productivity, not from giving away money. And despite the Federal Reserve's dollar printing, profit is the only way real money is created. Give. Don't take. Christians are commanded to give, not to take. How could a person give without profit? The answer is she cannot. A person must receive more than the socialist dogma, to each according to his needs, in order to give. That's what I explain in podcast number 2, that Jesus was the prophet who made a profit. If he didn't make a profit, how did he keep the Old Testament commandment to give? But stay tuned, because we're onto something here. The socialist agenda is designed only for group giving, not for individual giving. So if you don't have what Anne Bradley in her book, Be Fruitful and Multiply, called leftovers, or what most of us call profit, you can't give. Here's a secret the socialists don't want you to know. They don't want you to give. They only want you to receive. Are you beginning to see why socialism is not biblical? The government or the government? In a perfect world, we would have no government. James Madison wrote in Federalist 51, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable a government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. End quote from James Madison in Federalist 51. We want as little government as possible, right? Further, the government officials who forcefully extract this money from its rightful owners, they're fallen too. So they will act in their own self-interest, whenever they actually are allowed to. Supply first, then consume. This could lead into a long description of the supply side argument that I won't waste your time making it today. Suffice it to say that supply siders want government to set the rules and maintain competition. After that, get out of the way. Those on the demand side, they support the government. They believe that demand comes first. This is just so backwards. President Biden's demand side thinking is to, quote, rebuild an economy from the bottom up and the middle out. But workers need good jobs, not handouts paid for by capitalist gains taxes. So that long-lasting jobs are created by savings invested in new production. As I record this in early August 2021, the economy is doing well because we're on a sugar high from monetary low interest rates and fiscal stimulus. When the sugar wears off, the jobs will go away. We need sustainable growth that is built from supply-side investment, not fake demand. See, socialists are good at demand, not so good at supply. They can tell you why national health care, child care, and Medicare are demanded, but they can't figure out how to supply it. By the way, did you notice in that last sentence there were 3 cares in a row? Which reminds me of the famous quote from Art Lindsley in his book called Free Indeed. Quote, the government should punish evil and not do good. The church should do good but not punish evil. Folks in the Biden administration apparently have not read Mr. Lindsley's book. This is simple supply and demand economics, and there's no easy shortcuts. You can't have demand without supply. Closing of the economy during the pandemic should have proved that. The stimulus checks, that's increasing demand, could not be spent on supply until the businesses reopened. It does not work. But the government continues to do it. What's that old phrase? Continuing to do the same thing while expecting a different result is a definition of insanity? Well, by that definition, congressional demand-siders are insane. Look, I was demanding a smartphone in 1973. It wasn't supplied until 1992. We're still demanding flying cars and chocolate without calories, but until they're supplied, demand does no good. My co-author on biblical economic policy was Sergei Seidamitov. I've tried to get his name changed to Dr. Say around Dallas Baptist University, but I've failed to do so far. That would be appropriate because there was an economist named Say who wrote Say's Law. It explains that the supply of one good is demand for another. It's often simplified too much into supply creates its own demand. That's not a very accurate description of Say's Law. A better way to describe it might be buyers demand something via the supply of something else. Supply precedes demand. Egg, then chicken, as Mr. Kessler writes. No need to save? John Wesley famously said, earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. It's the title of my podcast number 10. You may have noticed he didn't say spend all you can. That is not in the Christian value system. Demand-side spending steals savings. This is basic economics. A dollar is either saved or taxed. It can't be both. Taxing removes money from the private sector. So the question should always be, where will this money do the most good? In the private economy or in the hands of fallen government officials? I fear we have stopped even asking the question because we've forgotten the basic truth stated earlier in this podcast. The government has no money. Not your father's economy. There are 2 falsehoods that hang on in economics, even though they've been proven wrong multiple times. Number 1 is spending on World War II ended the Great Depression. That statement confuses correlation and causality. They happened about the same time, but spending did not end the recession. It was ending before the war started. Fallacy number 2, FDR's spending ended the Great Recession. Wrong again. Ben Bernanke's PhD dissertation showed that spending extended the Great Recession. It didn't end it. Yet, this old prime the pump economics fallacy still remains. Even if they did work, when do you stop priming? This month, the Fed will buy $120 billion worth of bonds, and the economy grew 6.5% in the last quarter. And on the fiscal side, the great spenders in Congress want to keep priming that old pump. They assume it will only work when it's being primed. Well, if that's the case, then there's something wrong with the pump. The 2 lost decades of the Japanese economy are testament to that. When demand drops, government spending and giveaways make things worse. The only solution to kickstart production is to increase investment and increase jobs by cutting taxes and easing regulation. Look, you may not like President Trump as a person, but his economic policies worked, producing the lowest Black and Hispanic unemployment levels since the data has been recorded. There's this long-lasting question: which came first, the chicken or the egg? Look, have you ever wondered why it was not asked the other way? Which came first, the egg or the chicken? Because in economics, it is quite clear that the egg comes first. There must be supply before there's demand. As Mr. Kessler wrote so clearly in the title of his article, you can't enact the chicken. In Christian economics terms, we would say, God made something out of nothing, but humans cannot. We live in an era where there's too much pride in human accomplishments and not enough humility giving God credit for His created order. I explained some of this in podcast 21, which is titled Economic Humanism. God can make the chicken first, but humans must start with an egg. You're welcome to think of that as a nest egg. I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. Fear God, tell the truth, earn a profit. See you next time. For more information, please visit us online at davearnott.com. If you have questions or suggestions for future podcasts, please submit them online or in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.